As promised, I set up my code window that includes calculating kappa when there are more than two choices. So as you can see here, what I made over here was a very similar setup as before. Two coders, and we calculate inter-rater reliability for classification type data. So we've already agreed upon instances of, my example here is student outbursts. And the raters might have to classify these as mild, moderate, or severe. Perhaps if you're doing a functional behavior assessment or behavior intervention plan and you want to see if your intervention was working, you'd want to see if there was a decrease in certain levels of behavior. It depends on what your goal was. So this is just one example where you might need three different classifications for specific data. So what I did here was I just used the same example video, and this is fake data, obviously, because hopefully this kid wouldn't have outbursts this frequently. But I wanted to test to make sure that it worked. So again, you have agreed upon instances, and notice how I changed this. You can see I had a red diamond here instead of a green diamond. That means for an outburst code, I didn't have it turn on and off automatically, because something like an outburst, you would actually also probably want to calculate duration of an outburst. So that, I didn't do any calculations on this code window yet, but that's something I certainly could do. I could have some outputs here that would tell me how long each of the outbursts were, because that information would also be pretty important. And actually, that might be the first step to get the agreed upon instances. And then the second step for inter-rater reliability would be then to level the magnitude of those outbursts. So here it is, and I used the same method as I did before. After we had the agreed upon instances, if you hold option. What is going on here? Control. I don't know why I forget which one. Okay, so control and click, and all of the different labels that you've made on your code window will pop up, and you can just click and add labels after the fact. So that's what I did here, pretending that there were two raters, and I made some agree and some not agree, and then it automatically calculates kappa. I do want to show you that I know in the actual post, I posted that table to show you that now it's a 3x3 table for the agreements. So if you're looking at my scripts, it's a little bit more complicated than the first script, because instead of just A, B, C, D, which is what we had before, now it goes through A through I, because there are three choices by three choices. So basically, this would be very easy for you to just take this window and copy paste my script here, and you can change these codes to be whatever you want using that find and replace feature. So for this time, I'm going to post this code window again. Now that includes the 3-choice option for kappa, and I'm also going to post just a new PDF document if you want it for your own reference later. Something I want to mention, I only had, let's see, I think I made 18 instances here. When it comes to kappa, remember now, especially the more choices you have, the larger your sample is going to need to be. So something like outbursts, you probably wouldn't calculate kappa for each day. You'd probably do it for your whole study. So all the different days, you'd probably combine the timelines, make one big one, and then tweak the kappa script so it calculates for all of them combined. Just because if you have, as I mentioned in my first video, if you don't have enough instances, your kappa is not going to be very accurate. And I did find in an online source to kind of, this is the interpretation of kappa. I think I have it over here. So I did find an article about, how big does that sample size actually need to be very accurate. And it really all depends. What this is saying is it depends on how accurate you think your coders are, which I know that's what we're trying to find out. So it's kind of a strange thing to think about. But so for example, if you think that the raters are going to agree about half the time, how good was your training trials? You probably want to calculate this by hand during some training. And if you think they're agreeing about 50% of the time, then based on your relative error, this is how many instances you would need to have. So that's kind of where you need to decide. So as you can see, if you don't think that people are going to agree very often, if you think it's a really tricky operational definition, you're going to want really large sample sizes to get an accurate kappa calculation. But if you think they're pretty obvious and you have very clear operational definitions, you can see that the sample sizes needed are much smaller. So my 18, for these mild, moderate, severe, if I had them pretty good, I'd probably fall somewhere in here. but that's still a pretty large relative error. So these are just things I want you to think about when it comes to statistics. You can make all these calculations, but if they're not valid, it's not very useful to you. So again, I would probably recommend, especially the more options you have and the more cells in that. So if you add a fourth choice, you're going to have a 4 by 4 matrix, and now there'll be 16 options. So when you're doing these calculations, again, more sample would be necessary for an accurate calculation. So that's it for today. I think the most useful thing for you is actually just going to be to have access to this code window so you can copy, paste, modify as you need it. At least this way you don't have to think it out. You can kind of see my pattern. I'm not going to post a 4 by 4. It's the same exact pattern. If you look at both of my sheets, you can see how I made the changes. And hopefully this helps you out.